Hello and welcome. So today we have another installment of the Philosophy 101 series, and this video and the three that follow will be a journey into logic and critical thinking. So if ethics teaches us to how to decide what is right, logic teaches us how to think clearly and argue effectively. The focus of this video will be on understanding the structure of arguments, the building blocks of reasoned thought itself. So today's agenda is going to be fairly simple. We are going to get right to the point, which is nice. So first of all, we're going to look at what is an argument. We are essentially going to define an argument. Now, in philosophy, we often play the language games, the definition games, and in some cases go round and round in circles and not really get anywhere. But in this case, when it comes to defining an argument, it is not at all ambiguous. So that's nice and somewhat of a rarity in philosophy. So make the most of it while you can. So yeah, what is an argument? That's what we're going to look at first. And then we are going to move on to examine the components of an argument, which is important. If you are baking a cake, you need to understand what the ingredients you're using actually are. So after we've looked at the components of an argument, we can then explore concepts, vital concepts like validity, soundness, and strength. And finally, we will look through some examples together and do some exercises that will help to solidify your understanding of the subject at hand. So what is an argument? In everyday conversation, we often think of arguments as disagreements or fights, screaming matches and, emotional outbursts and tantrums and all manner of other things. But in philosophy and logic, an argument is something wildly different. An argument is a set of statements, one of which is the conclusion, and the others are premises that support it. So let's think about how we define an argument. And everything you need to know is in the sentence I spoke only a moment ago. So forgive me for the repetition. But an argument, when we define an argument consists of a group of statements. And within that group of statements, you have premises that provide reasons or evidence. And you also have a conclusion. And the conclusion is what the premises are supposed to be in support of. So the premises are the evidence or reasons for the conclusion. So let's think about a really, really, really simple argument. All humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Socrates is mortal. So the goal of an argument is to persuade someone that the conclusion is true based on the premises. If the premises are true and the reasoning is correct, then the argument is successful. So that example I just gave you, all humans are mortal, Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. So let's look at the premises in that set of statements. The first one was all humans are mortal. And I think we can all agree that that is true. Human beings have thus far proved to be mortal. And the second premise in that argument was that Socrates is a human. Well, Socrates was definitely a human. We know that because we have records of Socrates, of his life and his death and so on. So he was definitely human. So therefore the conclusion is also true. So premise 1, all humans are mortal, is true. And premise 2, Socrates as a human, is also true. Therefore the conclusion, i.e. that Socrates is mortal, has to be true. Premise 1 and premise 2 are correct. Therefore the conclusion has to be correct. So as I said a minute ago, the goal of an argument is to persuade someone that the conclusion is true based upon the premises. If the premises are true and the reasoning is correct, then the argument is obviously successful. So I want you to have a think about a recent argument you've had with someone. What was the conclusion and what were the reasons you gave to support it? So what was your conclusion and what were your premises? Jump in the comments with that. Just pause the video to do that, obviously. But have a good think about this, because it is something that we all do in our daily lives, and in our day-to-day. We all have to argue for or against things. Whether it's on the small scale or the grand scale, it doesn't really matter. So we all do it. So we all have examples in our lives that we can look upon and consider. So identify a recent argument that you've had with someone, and then let us know what the conclusion was and what the premises were that you listed to support that conclusion. So when you've done that, come back here and we can then move on to examining the components of an argument. So in our exploration of the components of an argument, we are going to start by looking at identifying premises and conclusions. To analyze an argument, any argument, the first step is to identify the premises and the conclusion. And this can actually be, although the examples I've given you thus far have been really, really simple, this can actually be quite tricky in longer arguments. As a result, there are some keywords that you can look out for that will help you to identify whether it's a premise or a conclusion. So we have words like because, since, for, given that. And these words, these keywords, they help us to identify the premises, the reasons, the support, the evidence. So those keywords again to look out for were because, since, for, given that. And there's plenty of other words we could throw in there, but it's generally words to that effect. So that helps us to identify premises. We also have words like therefore, thus, hence, so. And these words, unlike the other ones, because, since, for, and given that, these words, therefore, thus, hence, and so, help us to identify the conclusion. So when we see that word in the sentence, we see therefore, thus, hence, so. What follows is the conclusion. So let's try an example, and we'll make it a little more complex than the examples we've had so far. Regular exercise improves mental health. Mental health is important for overall well-being. Therefore, regular exercise is important for overall well-being. So that argument, in that argument, I want you to identify the premises and the conclusions. I want you to post that in the comments. So that argument was regular exercise improves mental health. Mental health is important for overall well-being. Therefore, regular exercise is important for overall well-being. So which statements in that are premises and which are the conclusion? So pause the video, have a think about that, put your response in the comments and then come back. So, did you do it? Excellent. So let's have a think about that together, right? So we have 3 statements. The first statement was regular exercise improves mental health. The second statement was mental health is important for overall well-being. And the third statement was therefore regular exercise is important for well-being. So we're going to go in reverse order because, well, why not? So that third statement, do you think that is a premise or a conclusion? So if you remember, that statement was, therefore, regular exercise is important for overall well-being. So is that a conclusion or is it a premise? And have a think back to the keywords that I mentioned before. The keywords for premises were words like because, since, for, given that. And the keywords for conclusions were words like therefore, thus, hence, and so. So that statement, that third statement from the argument, therefore regular exercise is important for overall well-being, is a conclusion. The statement before that conclusion was mental health is important for overall well-being. So do you think that is a premise or a conclusion? Bearing in mind we've already identified the conclusion. So what do you think? Is it another conclusion? Or is it a statement in support of the conclusion we've already identified? If you said it is a premise, it is a statement in support of what we've already identified as a conclusion, you would of course be correct. And the other statement, the first statement that we need to examine was regular exercise improves mental health. And this statement, as you can probably tell, is also a premise. So now that we've figured out how to identify, or at least some of the ways that we can identify premises and conclusions, we can start to think about explicit versus implicit premises. And this is where sometimes things get a little more ambiguous and tricky and so on, but only a little, and not really in any measurable amount, in my opinion, but we shall see. So not all arguments state their premises explicitly. In fact, quite a lot of the time, especially in sort of regular conversation, quite a lot of the time, the argument assumes something that isn't directly stated. So let's consider an example. So think about this following argument. You shouldn't trust him because he lied to you before. You shouldn't trust him because he lied to you before. What's the implicit premise here? The premise that is not stated explicitly, but is instead implied. Have a think about it. So remember that argument was you shouldn't trust him because he lied to you before. So what is the implicit premise here? So if you said something along the lines of people who lie are untrustworthy, you would be absolutely correct. So that is an example of an implicit premise, a premise that is assumed or implied without being sort of explicitly laid out. So now we can think about further sort of solidifying that in our minds by doing a quick activity. So what I want you to do is write a short argument and include an implicit premise. I want you to post that in the comments and interact with other commenters and identify each other's implicit premises. If you don't want to post it in the comments, then try and find someone you can do this with, or try looking for, write your own argument that includes an implicit premise. But then if you have no one to sort of buddy up with and swap with, then look online or in the media for an example of an argument that has an implicit premise and try and identify what that premise is. But the best possible results will be achieved by either buddying up with someone and doing this activity with them, or trying to do it in the comments with other people. So have a stab at that. So write a short argument and include an implicit premise, and then trade that with somebody and identify each other's implicit premises. So pause the video and go and do that. And when you come back, we will start looking at validity, soundness, and strength. Three concepts that are vital for our understanding of arguments and logic. An argument is valid if the conclusion logically follows from the premises. Validity doesn't depend on whether the premises are true, only on the logical structure of the argument. So let's think of an example. So, premise 1, if it rains, the ground will be wet. Premise 2, it rains. Conclusion, the ground is wet. Now, this argument is valid because if the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. But what if the premises are not true? What if they're false? Does that affect validity? And the answer to that, of course, is actually, and somewhat counterintuitively, no, it doesn't. We need something else that will test the sort of truthfulness of the claims. And that something else is soundness. So an argument is sound if it is valid and all its premises are true. Soundness guarantees that the conclusion is also true. So remember that example I gave right at the beginning of an argument, all humans are mortal, Socrates is human. therefore Socrates is mortal. Well, that is an example of an argument that is both valid and sound. It's valid in that it follows the proper structure, and the conclusion logically follows from the premises. And it's sound because the premises are true. It is true that all humans are mortal. It is true that Socrates is a human. Therefore, it is true that Socrates is mortal. So I want you to, and this is a quick exercise before we move on to looking at the looking at strength. What I want you to do is jump in the comments and answer this. So come up with an example of a valid but unsound argument and share that with the class. So if you'll remember, an argument is valid if the conclusion necessarily follows the premises, and it is sound if the premises are true. So essentially you need to come up with an argument that is valid but the premises aren't true. Put that in the comments. You get an extra virtual high five if you come up with something funny, but no pressure. So now we can have a think about, obviously pause the video and do that and then come back. But now you've done that, because you're good like that, and you definitely paused the video and did that. Now that you've done that, we can start thinking about strength and inductive arguments. So far, the examples that I've given you have all been deductive arguments. And deductive arguments deal in certainty. The conclusion is true if it logically follows the premises and the premises are true. There is, in some sense, no new information found in deduction. It's more like validating than any sort of discovery. So inductive arguments, that's what I was looking for. Inductive arguments are somewhat different because they don't deal in certainty. Instead, they deal in probability. So an inductive, I can't even speak today. An inductive argument is strong if the premises make the conclusion likely. The more likely the conclusion, the stronger the inductive argument is. So let's think about that with an example. So premise one, the sun has risen every day for billions of years. Conclusion, the sun will rise tomorrow. So is this argument certain? Well, no, because there's nothing in the premise that actually guarantees the conclusion. So the argument definitely isn't certain, but is it strong? So is it likely that the sun will rise tomorrow? And the answer to that, of course, is yes. Now, we have no guarantees that it will rise tomorrow, but it is extremely likely that it will. So the argument is certain. It is not certain, but it is strong. So that is in a sort of nutshell, that is strength and inductive arguments. So now that we have looked at the different those different concepts, strength, validity, and soundness, we can start to think about some practice examples. So what we're going to do is practice identifying premises, conclusions, and the sort of validity of these arguments. So all cats are mammals. Some mammals are dogs. Therefore, some cats are dogs. Now, is this valid or invalid, and why? Well, let's think about it. So premise one, all cats are mammals, establishes that all cats are mammals, like it says on the tin. And premise two says that some mammals are dogs. However, there is no logical connection between cats and dogs that is established in the premises. While some mammals are dogs, it does not imply that any of those mammals are also cats. The conclusion, some cats are dogs, assumes a relationship between cats and dogs that is just not supported by the premises. The premises only tell us that all cats are mammals and some mammals are dogs. And these statements, they don't overlap in a way that would allow us to deduce that any cat is also a dog. So this argument commits a fallacy of undistributed middle, where it improperly assumes that because two groups share a larger category, i.e. mammals, that they must share members, which is obviously not true in this case. So that argument is invalid, and that's why. So now we have another example that we can have a little play around with. If you study, you'll pass the test. You studied. Therefore, you'll pass the test. So premise one was, if you study, you'll pass the test. And symbolically, we would represent that as if S, then P. And we actually use a little arrow for that, for the if then. We'll get into that when we actually look at the, I think that's the next video. But for now, just think of it as if S, then P. And premise two was you studied, and symbolically, that is you did S. Conclusion, you'll pass the test. Symbolically, that is you will P. So an argument is valid if its conclusion logically follows from the premise or premises. And in this case, premise one provides a conditional statement. If S, then P. If you study, you'll pass the test. And premise two affirms the antecedent S of the conditional statement. So by modus ponens, a valid logical rule, if S is true and if S then P must be true. Therefore, the argument is valid because the conclusion logically follows from the premises. But what about its soundness? Is it sound? Well, let's find out. Let's have a think about it. So, as you know now, an argument is sound if it's valid and its premises are actually true. So premise one claims that studying guarantees passing the test. This may or may not be true in reality. I.e., if the test is, it's difficult, or external factors affect the outcome, and so on. So the truth of this premise depends on the context. Premise 2 claims that you studied. And if this is true, like in reality, then the premise is satisfied. If both premises are true in reality, then the argument is sound. If premise 1 is not always true, then the argument is valid but not sound. So in conclusion, this argument is valid, i.e. the conclusion follows logically from the premises, but it's not sound. The argument is only sound if premise 1 is factually correct, and there's no way to actually guarantee that that would be the case. So therefore, the argument is valid but not sound. Hopefully, that makes sense. So at this point, it would be a good idea, in order to solidify your understanding, it would be a good idea to construct one valid argument, one invalid argument, and one inductive argument, and post them in the what's the word I'm looking for? The comments. And if you get stuck, then just jump in the comments and say, I'm stuck, I don't understand, whatever your issue is, and then I can and will do my very best to answer your question and hopefully get you unstuck, so to speak. And once you have constructed your valid argument, your invalid argument, and your inductive argument and posted them, go and engage with other people who have posted theirs and get a discussion going around those. Really push as to whether those are valid and sound arguments, and so on and so forth, but get a discussion going, and that will definitely help to increase your understanding, and it'll also mean that you'll be more able to, it gives you an opportunity to practice sort of identifying the different components of an argument, what kind of an argument you're facing, and the validity, soundness, and strength of an argument. So go and have those discussions, but pause the video, and then when you come back, we can wrap up. So understanding the structure of arguments is the first step in becoming a better thinker. Whether we are evaluating someone else's arguments or building our own, knowing how to identify premises, conclusions, and logical validity is essential. These are skills that are important for life in general, not just philosophy or academia, but every area of your life. So before we part ways, as a final attempt to help solidify this newfound knowledge in your mind, I want you to write a short paragraph or two answering the following question. Why is it important to distinguish between valid and sound arguments in everyday reasoning? So that question was, why is it important to distinguish between valid and sound arguments in everyday reasoning? So go ahead and have a think about that and try and answer it. Post it in your response in the comments. A paragraph or two is fine, but you can go wild and, write more if you so choose to. That is not a problem. but post those in the comments. And then once you've done that, go and have a look at other people's responses in the comments as well, because you might gain some insight from viewing the way that those other people have thought about the question. So as to remind you again, that question was, why is it important to distinguish between valid and sound arguments in everyday reasoning? So I look forward to reading those responses, and when we get into the next video, we'll be diving into formal logic and how to use tools like truth tables and logical operators and things like that. So we're going to get really into the heart of reasoning and argumentation and such in that. So go and watch that one now. But before you go, I would like to ask if you could do all the YouTube things, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and so on. I would really appreciate it, and it would mean that YouTube will show you more of my content. But more importantly, and this really is more importantly, YouTube will show you content from other people talking about similar things, similar topics and whatnot. And that in turn will help you to widen your sort of your net, as it were, and deepen your understanding of these subjects. And it gives you a much more it gives you access to more perspectives on those subjects, so that you can view it through the lens of sort of different interpretations and so on. And well, that will only be of benefit to you. There is no downside to that. It will help you to refine your thinking and your worldview and you know, all of that good stuff. So like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you on the next ones. Thank you very much for your time today. I do really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it informative and interesting. And yeah, I'll see you soon on that next one. Thank you very much.